I knew trouble had found me the moment Claire wouldn't meet my eyes. It was right after the rehearsal dinner, the fairy lights still glowing over the patio, the air smelling faintly of rosemary chicken and spilled champagne. She brushed past me as if I carried a draft of winter with me, and something in her tight smile whispered that tomorrow would not be the peaceful celebration I had prayed for. I suppose you need to know who I am before you judge what happened. My name is Eleanor May Turner, and at 68, I have lived long enough to bury a husband, raise a son alone, and patch more roofs and hearts than I can count. My herald used to call me the gentle hammer, soft-spoken, steady, but always able to hold a home together. When he passed, I used every penny of our savings to help our son Daniel through college. I worked nights at the library, filed tax forms for neighbors, and kept the old mortgage current with careful envelopes and handwritten ledgers. I never asked for anything except to see my boy happy. Daniel met Claire at a tech seminar in Charlotte. She was bright, polished, ambitious, the sort of young woman who color codes her life and triple checks receipts before tossing them out. I tried to welcome her, even when she wrinkled her nose at my garden shoes or made comments about old-fashioned budgeting. I told myself she was nervous, that being close to someone like me, someone who still adds figures by hand and saves grocery receipts in a shoebox, might feel foreign to her. The wedding planning made their apartment feel like a command center. Claire handled everything: spreadsheets, vendor contracts, deposits tracked with color-coded notes. She would text me instructions, when to arrive, what shade of dress wouldn't clash with the paleted, what hairstyle was age-appropriate. I swallowed each message like lukewarm medicine, reminding myself that weddings were stressful, and young people sometimes forget the weight their words can carry. The day before the ceremony, she asked me to meet her at the venue so she could walk me through expectations. Her voice was crisp, as if speaking through a pane of glass. When I arrived, she stood by the floral arch, tapping her phone as a coordinator adjusted microphones. "Eleanor," she said without looking up, "I want to make sure everything goes smoothly tomorrow. Please don't overdo anything. Daniel told me you get emotional." I blinked at her, feeling a small sting behind my ribs. "I promise I won't cause any fuss." "I know you mean well," she continued, adjusting a place card with 2 fingers. "But the ceremony is being live-streamed. The last thing we need is something unplanned." I left the venue with the quiet tremble of someone who has learned not to speak pain aloud. That night, I ironed my pale blue dress and laid my late husband's handkerchief inside my purse. I whispered into the dark that I wished Harold were here, that he'd know how to steady my heart the way he once steadied the legs of our kitchen table. The morning of the wedding dawned soft and gold. I arrived early as instructed and waited in the foyer with the program folded neatly in my lap. While the photographer arranged the family for group shots, Claire approached me with her bouquet clutched too tightly. "Eleanor," she said sharply, "please try not to draw attention. This is our day." She looked at the coordinator. She tends to talk a lot when she's nervous. I hadn't said a single word yet. My breath caught, heavy as wet linen. I watched her turn away, laughing with her bridesmaids as if nothing had happened. Inside me, something old and quiet shifted. Some small boundary I had let erode through years of being useful, agreeable, invisible. Still, I smiled through photos. I held my shawl close. I told myself the ceremony would wash these moments away, that perhaps she was simply overwhelmed. But as guests began to take their seats, Daniel hurried toward me. He wasn't angry, just flustered, tugging at his cufflinks. "Mom, Claire said you made her uncomfortable earlier. Maybe just keep things simple, okay? Don't say anything unless you need to." It felt like a hand closing around the last free piece of me. He didn't look cruel, just distracted, just young, just unaware of how deep a single sentence can cut when spoken to the woman who carried you, fed you, fought the world for you. In that moment, something inside me went still. Not defeated, no. Still the way the earth becomes still before a storm rearranges the sky. I nodded, because mothers nod, but I felt the first quiet spark of a resolve that would guide every step I took in the weeks that followed. I knew then that this wasn't simply about a wedding. It was about the way I had let myself fade into the corners of my own life. And I knew calmly, certainly, that I would not stay invisible much longer. I woke the next morning with the faint ache of yesterday still sitting in my chest, the way a bruise lingers beneath a sweater. Weddings are supposed to leave you with soft memories, petals on the floor, laughter drifting like music. But all I carried home was the echo of my own silence. I made myself tea and sat by the window, watching the neighbor's dog tug his owner down the street. For a long moment, I wondered if I had imagined everything. Maybe Claire hadn't meant it. Maybe Daniel hadn't realized how his words landed. But then I reached into my purse and found the program from the ceremony, folded with almost military precision. I remembered how tightly I'd held it, how my hands had trembled when Daniel asked me not to speak. No. I hadn't imagined it. Pain has a way of clarifying the truth. After Harold died, I learned to keep meticulous records of everything: bank statements, tax forms, warranty slips, even instructions manuals. It wasn't just about organization. It gave me a sense of control when the world felt unsteady. Over the years, that habit grew into a quiet ritual. Every Sunday evening, I would sit at the dining table with a cup of chamomile and sort through papers while the clock ticked softly. I never thought much about it, until it saved me more than once. When Daniel needed proof of payment for an old scholarship appeal, I had the receipt. When the insurance company misplaced Harold's life policy, I had the signed original tucked in a plastic sleeve. Those memories drifted through me now, like someone tapping gently on my shoulder. I wasn't a loud woman. I wasn't confrontational. But I understood documentation, boundaries, and the power of having your facts in order. And maybe, just maybe, that would matter sooner than I expected. A few days after the wedding, I received an email from Claire. No greeting, no warmth, just a short message copied from a template, asking me to complete reimbursement for part of the rehearsal dinner. She claimed she had covered my share because I hadn't reacted fast enough when the server brought the bill. My share? I had paid for Daniel's suit alterations, the florist's last-minute adjustments, and half the catering deposit when the vendor threatened to cancel. Still, I didn't argue. I simply replied asking for the itemized invoice. Her answer came in a single line: "I don't think that's necessary." That was when something subtle shifted inside me. Not anger. No. Just a small, steady alignment of understanding. People who don't want to show paperwork almost always have a reason. 2 days later, Daniel called. He sounded tired. "Mom, Claire said you're making things complicated." He sighed. "It's a small amount. Can you just pay it so everything is smooth?" There it was again. Smooth. The word people use when they really mean quiet, when they mean compliant, when they mean unseen. I closed my eyes. "Daniel," I said softly, "I'm happy to help. I always have been. But I don't pay bills without seeing what I'm being charged for. That's just how I manage my budget." He hesitated, caught between loyalty and convenience. "I'll talk to her," he finally muttered, but I could already hear the distance forming, a thin crack in the bridge between us. That night, I pulled out my binder of wedding-related expenses. Emails printed, receipts tucked neatly into sleeves, notes scribbled in the margins where vendors had changed terms. I hadn't collected them with any intention beyond habit, but as I flipped through the pages, a quiet certainty settled into my bones. I was not imagining things. I was not overreacting. I was being maneuvered into a position where my compliance was expected, my presence tolerated, and my role reduced to whatever made someone else's life more convenient. I felt the familiar exhaustion of a woman who has spent years smoothing the path for others while walking barefoot herself. But beneath that tiredness was something firmer, like bedrock under shifting soil. The world may not always listen to soft voices, but it listens to weak evidence. And though I didn't yet know what shape the conflict would take, I sensed, deep in that steady, older part of me, that this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a lesson I had spent decades preparing to teach, even if I didn't know it yet. I didn't intend to confront anyone. Not then. I simply wanted clarity, the kind that settles the mind like a well-balanced ledger. But clarity has a way of revealing more than you expect, and sometimes it pulls back curtains you didn't realize were there. A week after the email exchange, I stopped by Daniel and Claire's apartment to drop off a framed photo from the wedding. I didn't call first. Daniel had told me countless times I was always welcome. But when my knuckles tapped the door, the energy inside the home felt tense, whispering, footsteps. A pause too long to be casual. Claire opened the door with that rigid smile she wore when she felt cornered. "Eleanor," she said, stepping aside, "we weren't expecting you." Daniel sat on the couch, his shoulders tight, his phone face down beside him. He looked up at me with a softness that had faded lately, like colors sun-bleached over time. "I just brought this," I said, holding up the photo. "Thought it might be nice on your entry table." Claire took it before Daniel could even reach for it, her fingers tightening around the frame. "We'll find a place," she murmured, though her tone suggested otherwise. I glanced around. Wedding envelopes and documents were spread across the coffee table. Vendor folders, printed contracts, crossed-out notes. Something in me sharpened, not suspicious, merely aware. "Planning thank you cards?" I asked gently. Daniel sighed, trying to sort out some last bills. There were more unexpected charges than we thought. Claire shot him a look, a quick warning flicker. "We don't need to involve anyone else." "I didn't mean to intrude," I said softly. But then, as I reached for my purse, I saw, half covered by Claire's cardigan, a folded document with my name highlighted. Not printed, highlighted. And beneath it, a line item that read, "Reimbursement, Turner," a number beside it much larger than the rehearsal dinner amount. My breath stilled. Claire casually slid her cardigan over the papers, but not before I noticed the date. A week before the ceremony, a time when she had assured me everything was fully handled. "Is there something I should know?" I asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, torn. "It's nothing, Mom. Just accounting stuff." Claire's voice sharpened at the edges. "It's complicated wedding math. You wouldn't understand the system." The words weren't loud, but they rang through me like a struck bell. I felt my age pressed up against me then, not in weakness, but in truth, because I did understand systems. I understood budgets, I understood how paper trails could protect or expose. And more than anything, I understood when someone was using my gentleness as a shield for their own carelessness. On the drive home, streetlights blurring past, my mind kept returning to those highlighted lines. The way Claire had covered them without thinking. The way Daniel had looked down, not up, when I asked. I pulled into my driveway and sat inside the car long after the engine clicked quiet. The night air felt heavy, like a story waiting to be told. Inside, at the old wooden table Harold built, I spread out my binder. I ran my hand across the plastic sleeves, each one holding a truth someone might prefer remained unsaid. Payment confirmations, screenshots of vendor messages, final balances, all time-stamped. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for understanding. real, grounded understanding. But as I pieced the puzzle together, I saw discrepancies. Charges that had been urgent, yet never used. Fees claimed twice. Deposits shifted into the wrong category. Claire hadn't just misled me. She had used my contributions to plug mistakes she didn't want Daniel to see. My heart clenched, not from anger, but from disappointment so deep it felt ancestral. Mothers know when they are being taken for granted. We feel it like weather in our bones. And then, an even deeper truth surfaced. I wasn't just being used, my silence was being counted on. That realization settled through me like a slow, cold breath. Not cruel, not dramatic, just clarifying. Have you ever felt something like this? When the moment comes, not with thunder, but with quiet certainty, that you have allowed others to believe your softness meant you would never draw a line? I closed the binder gently, as if tucking in a sleeping child. The line was coming. Not loud, not vengeful, not destructive, legal, documented, calm, as natural and as unshakable as the turning of a page. I didn't rush into anything. That's one gift age gives you. Patience that isn't passive, the kind that lets truth ripen before you touch it. Still, in the days that followed, I found myself waking earlier than usual, my mind sifting through details, the way my hands once sifted flour for Sunday biscuits. One morning, while sorting my recycling, I noticed the small stack of envelopes I had saved from the wedding payments. Each one still had the vendor's mailing label. I don't know what made me pause, maybe intuition, maybe simple habit, but I decided to call the florist just to confirm that the last-minute rush fee I had been asked to cover had indeed gone through. The owner, a woman named Marlene with a warm drawl, remembered me immediately. "Oh, honey, yes, your card covered the balance," she said, though I was surprised the bride didn't tell you she'd already paid the rush charge in advance. Sweet girl must have been overwhelmed. I stood there, fingers tightening around the phone, sunlight catching the dust in the air like suspended glitter. "She paid it already?" I asked. "Sure did," Marlene said. "2 weeks before the ceremony. You were just covering the standard balance, nothing extra." When I hung up, I sat at the table very still. A slow realization unfurled inside me, steady as dawn. Claire hadn't just shifted expenses, she had double-billed me. Confident, I suppose, that I wouldn't question anything, that I was just the helpful older woman who didn't understand modern systems. Later that afternoon, I headed to the bank to deposit a refund check from my dental insurance. The teller, a young man named Joel, greeted me kindly. He always did. As I endorsed the check, I asked whether he could show me the statement from the day I paid the caterer's deposit. I remembered the exact date. I remembered the relief on Claire's face when I had told her it was handled. Joel printed the page and slid it across the counter. The amount was there, clear, logged. But beneath it, only 5 minutes later, there was another transaction, a transfer Daniel had made to Claire's account for the exact same amount. It was labeled emergency wedding balance. So she had told him the caterer needed a second payment. She had told me the same. 2 payments, same purpose, same cost. My heart didn't race. It didn't break. It simply settled into a heavy, undeniable calm, the kind of calm that arrives only when a truth refuses to be ignored. That evening, alone in my quiet house, I laid out every document: receipts, emails, screenshots, bank statements. I arranged them in neat rows like a woman quilting a pattern she had finally learned to see. Piece by piece, the picture came together. Claire hadn't been overwhelmed. She had been slipping, careless with money, desperate to impress, patching holes in her planning with whatever resources were easiest to grab. And the easiest resource, apparently, had been me. My contributions, my silence, my reliability. I had become a quiet safety net she didn't want to acknowledge out loud. I thought of Daniel then, my sweet boy, who had grown into a man but still carried the softness of a child who trusted easily. He wasn't cruel, just unaware, distracted by love and the frantic swirl of adulthood. But there was something else I remembered too. The highlighted paper with my name on it, the quick movement of Claire's hand to cover it, the way she said, "You wouldn't understand the system." I may not understand her system, but I understood mine. Documentation, truth, boundaries. I allowed myself one small sigh, not of frustration, of acceptance. I wasn't preparing for battle, I was preparing for clarity. And clarity, when protected by evidence, becomes something far sturdier than anger. The next morning, I made a folder, a simple manila one with a label typed on my old machine. Wedding expenses. Verified. I didn't plan to confront anyone yet. Confrontation without preparation is just noise. But I did plan to understand every corner of what had been done, not for vengeance, but for dignity. Because dignity, once bruised, becomes something a woman my age guards with quiet ferocity. And as I locked the folder in my desk drawer, I felt a stillness inside me, the kind that forms right before a truth is spoken aloud for the first time. This wasn't just about money. It was about being seen, and I was done being invisible. The following days moved with a strange quietness, like the air before a summer storm. I went about my routines, watering my tomatoes, folding laundry, chatting with neighbors on my morning walk. But underneath everything was a steady hum of understanding. Once you see the truth of a situation, you can't unsee it. It sits beside you, like a polite but insistent guest. I didn't tell Daniel anything yet, not because I wanted to protect Claire, but because I wanted to protect the truth. Truth delivered too early becomes noise. Truth delivered too late becomes resentment. But truth delivered at the right moment, supported by facts, grounded in calm, can open a person's eyes without shattering them. A few days later, Daniel called. His voice was warm but hurried. "Mom, could you come over this weekend? Claire wants to finalize some stuff about the bills, and she said it would be good for everyone to be on the same page." On the same page. The phrasing almost made me smile. I had spent weeks gathering pages. I agreed, of course. Not out of obligation, out of certainty. The moment was approaching, and I wanted to meet it with the steadiness my age had earned. When Saturday came, I baked a lemon pound cake, the kind Daniel loved when he was little. I carried it in a foil-covered tin as I climbed the steps to their apartment. I could hear voices inside before I knocked. Claire's short, clipped tone and Daniel's softer replies. Claire opened the door, her posture stiff, her eyes scanning me as though expecting a problem before one existed. "Eleanor," she said, "we've made a list of outstanding charges. We need your portion by next Friday." I stepped inside and set the cake on the counter. "I brought something sweet," I said. "Conversations go better that way." Daniel gave a small smile, grateful for any easing of tension. Claire spread several papers across the dining table. Something about the way she handled them, quick, almost territorial, told me she believed she was fully in control of this moment. "These," she said, tapping the papers, "are your remaining financial obligations. Everything is itemized." I looked carefully. They weren't itemized. They were approximated, generalized charges without dates, without invoices, without vendor details. She was counting on me not asking questions, but I had come prepared. I set my purse on the chair, unzipped it, and placed my own folder gently on the table. The room grew still, the air shifting in that subtle way it does before something true is spoken. "I brought my records as well," I said softly, "just to make sure everything matches." Claire's smile faltered. There's no need for that. These are the totals. I opened the folder slowly. Claire, you asked me to trust your numbers. I'd simply like to confirm them. Daniel shifted uneasily. Mom, I'm sure Claire has it handled. She's been managing everything. I know, I answered. That's why it's important we all look together. I pulled out the florist receipt. The one showing the rush fee had already been paid. I placed it beside Claire's handwritten charge for the same fee. Then the caterer's deposit logs. Then the email screenshots showing confirmations that contradicted her listed amounts. Each document made a soft sound as it touched the table, like truth landing gently. Claire's eyes darted between the papers. These are old versions. You must have misunderstood. I don't think so, I said, keeping my voice warm, steady. These were printed the day they were issued. Daniel leaned closer, confusion spreading across his face. Claire, why are these different from yours? Claire bristled. Wedding planning was chaotic, Daniel. Things changed, and I had to adjust. Your mother just doesn't understand how complex everything was. I met her eyes, not with confrontation, but with an older woman's certainty. I may not be fluent in modern systems, Claire, but numbers speak the same language in every generation. Daniel looked at me then, really looked. I saw recognition flicker there. The boy who used to sit at the kitchen table while I balanced the checkbook was remembering. Mom, were we double charged? He asked. Yes, I said gently. More than once. Claire's face tightened. So what? We needed help. She offered. She didn't ask questions then. That was the moment something shifted entirely. Not in me, in Daniel. His expression settled into a quiet, disappointed understanding that seemed to dim the room. Claire, he said, voice low, you told me Mom insisted on covering those fees. You didn't tell me you already had. She opened her mouth, but no words came. I closed the folder and folded my hands. I didn't come here to accuse anyone. I came to make sure the truth was clear, and now it is. The silence that followed was not sharp. It was soft, heavy, inevitable. I stood and reached for my purse. I'll leave you both to talk. If you need clarification about any documents, you know where to find me. Daniel stopped me at the door. Mom, thank you. Not just for the facts, for the steadiness, for the line I had drawn without raising my voice. As I walked to my car, I felt no triumph, no bitterness, just the quiet relief of finally being seen clearly, even if only for a moment. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the sky had definitely changed. I didn't expect things to escalate so quickly. I truly believed that once the truth was laid out gently, like clean laundry on a line, everyone would breathe easier. But sometimes clarity unsettles those who depend on confusion to stay in control. 2 days after our conversation, I received a call, an unfamiliar number, local area code. When I answered, a brisk voice introduced herself as Linda Harper, an HR manager at the medical office where Claire worked. My breath paused just for a moment. Ms. Turner, she said carefully, I was hoping to ask a few questions regarding some invoices your daughter-in-law submitted. We're conducting a routine audit of employee reimbursement requests. Reimbursement. My heart sank in a slow, steady way. Not panic, not fear, just the recognition that another truth was unfolding. I'll answer whatever I can, I replied. She explained that Claire had filed claims for several family assistance expenses related to the wedding, charges she had labeled as emergency financial support from her mother-in-law, expenses she claimed she had paid on my behalf and was seeking reimbursement for. Except the documents Claire submitted were not the documents I had. Linda asked gently, Do you have copies of your payments to these vendors? I do, I said, all organized. I can bring them in. For a moment, the line was silent, as if the very air waited. Miss Turner, she said finally, I cannot advise you beyond this, but documentation will be extremely helpful. I hung up the phone slowly. I hadn't sought this. I hadn't reported anything. My intention was never to harm Claire's job or reputation, but evidence has a life of its own. When you build truth carefully and honestly, it becomes a structure others can lean on. Still, I sat there with my hands folded on my lap, feeling the old ache of loyalty tug at me. I didn't want to be the reason Claire faced consequences, but I also couldn't distort the truth to protect her from choices she had already made. I gathered my folder, straightened the papers, and added a written timeline. Not accusatory, just factual. Dates, payments, confirmations. Quiet truth. At the HR office, sunlight drifted through tall windows, catching the metallic edges of file cabinets. Linda greeted me with a firm handshake. Her presence reminded me of school principals, calm, observant, trained to read silence as well as speech. She led me into a small conference room. Please know, she said. This is standard procedure when discrepancies arise. We appreciate your cooperation. I nodded, placing the folder on the table. I'm not here to cause trouble, I said. I'm here to be accurate. She opened the folder and began comparing documents, my receipts to the ones Claire had submitted. With each page she turned, her expression changed in small, controlled ways. A tightening around the mouth, a slow exhale, a soft crease in her brow. These amounts don't match, she murmured. These invoices appear to be altered. This date doesn't align with the payment record. She wasn't speaking to me. She was thinking aloud, tracing the shape of the truth. Finally, she closed the folder gently, almost respectfully. Ms. Turner, thank you. We'll handle it from here. As I stood to leave, I felt a strange mixture. Sadness for what was unfolding, yes, but also a quiet affirmation that I had stayed on the right side of the line. I had told the truth without embellishment. I had kept my dignity intact. On the drive home, my thoughts drifted to Daniel. How would he react? Would he blame me? Would he blame her? Would he simply feel lost between two worlds he never asked to choose between? A question rose inside me, soft but insistent. Did you ever realize too late that you were being used? I had lived decades thinking my helpfulness made life easier for others, but it had also made me easy to take advantage of. Not maliciously, not always consciously, just conveniently. And now, here I was, facing the first real consequence of speaking up. That evening, Daniel came by unexpectedly. He stood in my doorway, hands shoved in his pockets like he used to do as a teenager when he'd broken something and didn't know how to admit it. He sat at the kitchen table tracing the wood grain with his fingertip. Mom, Claire got called into HR today. I folded my dish towel over the oven handle. I know. She said they questioned her receipts, asked about reimbursements. She's really upset. I imagine she is. He hesitated. Did you tell them? I met his eyes, steady. No, Daniel. They contacted me. They found the discrepancies on their own. He swallowed hard, and something in his expression shifted. Not anger, not disappointment. Just a dawning understanding of a world he hadn't wanted to believe existed. She said it was just stress, he whispered. That she panicked during planning. That she didn't mean to mislead anyone. I nodded. Stress can make people stumble, but it doesn't erase the steps they took. The room fell quiet. Outside, a dog barked, a car door closed. Life continued its slow, ordinary rhythm. Mom, Daniel said softly, I'm sorry. I should have seen this sooner. I should have listened. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. You're my son. Loving someone can blur the edges of what we think we know. There's no shame in that. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the safety of being understood. And I realized then that sometimes the hardest truths aren't about numbers or receipts. They're about learning to see yourself again, and learning, perhaps for the first time, where you end and someone else begins. Daniel didn't stay long that night. He left with the quiet heaviness of a man carrying questions he wasn't ready to ask aloud. After he drove away, I stood by the window watching the streetlights shimmer along the pavement. A part of me ached for him, my sweet boy, trapped between loyalty and clarity. But another part of me knew he had to walk this stretch of road himself. A mother can guide, but she cannot steer another adult's life, no matter how deeply she once held their hand. The next morning, I woke early and baked cinnamon muffins just to fill the house with a warm smell. Routine steadies me. It always has. But as I set the tray on the cooling rack, the doorbell rang. Quick, urgent. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there again, looking like he hadn't slept. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside, already sensing the day would bring another shift. He held a stack of printed emails in his hand, emails between him and Claire during the wedding planning. His fingers trembled slightly as he placed them on the table. I was going through our messages, he said, and I found things that don't make sense. She told me you volunteered to cover certain costs. She said you insisted it. But that wasn't true, was it? I shook my head gently. No, Daniel. I helped when asked. I never insisted. He nodded once, a slow, painful realization washing over him. He sat down heavily, the chair creaking beneath the weight of a truth he was still trying to absorb. I don't know who to be angry at, he whispered. Her? Myself? The whole situation? You don't need to be angry, I said softly. Anger doesn't bring clarity. Be honest with yourself instead. That's enough. He looked around my kitchen, eyes lingering on the worn wooden cabinets, the little ceramic hen by the stove, the old fridge covered in faded magnets, his childhood artwork still tucked beneath a yellowed grocery list. It struck me then how long I had been his safe place, and how unsteady he felt now, realizing not every truth in his new life was built on solid ground. I keep thinking, he said quietly, that maybe things will settle. She said HR just misunderstood the receipts. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Silence can be its own kind of wisdom. He exhaled. But then she tried to get me to text her manager to vouch for something she claimed you said. My heart tightened, not from surprise, but from the gentle sorrow of seeing a son torn between his love and his integrity. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her I wouldn't lie, he said. Not to HR, not to anyone. He rubbed his eyes. She got upset, started saying she was the victim, that people were out to embarrass her. Embarrassed, the same word she'd used at the wedding before I'd even spoken. It's strange how some truths circle back to the beginning, as if to show you the full shape of the pattern. Daniel shook his head. Mom, I don't know who she is right now. A softness rose in me, not pity, but understanding. Sometimes, I said, people get so tangled in the image they want to project that they forget who they're standing on to hold it up. He stared at the table, his voice a rasp. How did we end up here? I placed a steaming muffin in front of him. One decision at a time, I murmured. And one choice at a time, you'll find your way out. He stayed for breakfast, eating in small, absent bites. When he finally left, he hugged me longer than usual. It wasn't the hug of a boy seeking comfort. It was the hug of a man realizing the person he trusted most hadn't changed. Everyone else had. That afternoon, I received a voicemail. It was from Officer Halstead, a community liaison who often handled workplace fraud reports. His tone was courteous, not urgent. "Mrs. Turner," he said, "I'd like to ask a few questions to verify some information we've received. Nothing for you to worry about, only procedural. Please return my call at your convenience." Another ripple, another corner lifting. I called him back and answered everything simply, factually, without embellishment. He thanked me for my clarity, and though he didn't say so outright, I could tell he had already seen the discrepancies for himself. When I hung up, I stepped out onto the porch. The sun was dipping behind the maple trees, casting long gold shadows across the lawn. A warm breeze drifted through, carrying the faint scent of lilac. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not triumph, not vindication, peace. Because the truth was no longer trapped inside me. It was out in the world, doing what truth does, illuminating, revealing, unbinding. As the evening settled around me, I realized something profound in its simplicity. I hadn't set out to expose anyone. I had only insisted on being seen accurately, treated fairly, respected quietly. And sometimes, that alone is enough to make every hidden thing rise to the surface. The path ahead was still uncertain, for Daniel, for Claire, even for me. But I felt steady, rooted, ready for whatever came next. Daniel didn't call the next day, and I didn't expect him to. Some truths require silence before they can be spoken again. I spent the morning sweeping the porch, trimming the rosemary by the walkway, letting the small, familiar movements settle the air inside me. The world outside looked peaceful, sunlight warming the bricks, a blue jay hopping along the fence. But I sensed the quiet shift beneath it all, the way a river reshapes its banks, even when no one is watching. In the early afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Mom, can I come over after work? There's something we need to talk about." I typed back, "Of course, sweetheart," and set the kettle on the stove. While waiting for him, I sifted through old photographs. Daniel at 6, missing his front teeth. Daniel at 17, awkward and lanky in his prom tux. Harold holding him as an infant, both faces full of exhausted joy. I paused over that one for a long moment. Harold had always said, "Raise him to be honest, Ellie. The world will test him enough without us bending the truth at home." I wondered what he would think of everything now, how gently he would guide our son through this tangle. Daniel arrived just as the sun dipped behind the trees. His face looked drawn, as if he'd spent the day carrying something too heavy for one person. We sat at the kitchen table, our old meeting place for problems small and large. I poured him tea, though he barely touched it. "Mom," he said quietly, "Claire's been suspended from work." I nodded, my expression steady. "I'm sorry to hear that." "She told me it was temporary," he continued. "But then I got a call from Officer Halstead, too. He asked me questions about the receipts, about who paid what." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "It's becoming bigger than I expected." I waited, letting him find his footing. "She's angry with me," he admitted. "She said I betrayed her by not backing up her story." His voice shook just slightly. "But I couldn't lie. Not about money, not about you." A warmth spread through my chest, sadness and pride woven together. "You did the right thing," I said softly. He exhaled shakily. "I'm starting to see things I ignored. The way she brushed off details, how she'd panic over small expenses, but hide larger ones, how she expected people, especially you, to fill the gaps." His eyes lifted to mine. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" The question broke something small in me, but in a way that let the truth flow out freely. "Because," I said gently, I didn't want to be the reason you doubted your own life. I wanted the truth to come from what you saw, not what I told you to see." He looked down, running his thumb along the rim of his mug. "I think I knew something was off. I just didn't want to admit it. Sometimes people cling to the version of love that hurts them least, even when the truth would hurt them better." We talked for nearly an hour, quietly, steadily. Daniel told me Claire had gone through his phone, searching for messages between us. She had accused him of choosing sides, of letting other people influence their marriage. When he asked her directly about the altered receipts, she cried, then blamed stress, then blamed her manager, then circled back to blaming me. "She said you embarrassed her at the wedding," he whispered. I felt that old sting return, not sharp, but familiar. "Daniel," I said. I hadn't spoken yet. I hadn't even tried. "I know," he murmured. "I should have known then." But this wasn't about blame. It was about recognition, about a young man learning where trust ends and self-delusion begins. He finally leaned back and exhaled deeply. "I don't know what happens next. I don't know if our marriage can survive this." I reached out and placed my hand over his. "Whatever happens next," I said, "you won't face it alone." After he left, I stood in the doorway a long time, watching his car disappear down the road. The porch light cast a soft glow across the gravel, and the crickets sang in the humid dusk. For the first time in months, I felt no fear about the unraveling ahead. Instead, I felt something steadier, like the settling of old earth after a landslide. Later that night, as I was turning down the living room lamps, my phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. I opened it slowly, expecting perhaps another formality from HR or the officer. But it was Claire, a single line. "You've ruined everything. I hope you're happy." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the table. Her words didn't cut, they simply fell flat, like a match striking wet stone. I felt no urge to reply, no tremor of guilt, just a quiet understanding. People who build their world on borrowed stability will always blame the one who finally stops holding them up. I made myself a cup of warm milk and sat by the window. The night air drifted through the curtains, cool and honest. And as I watched a lone car pass on the empty road, a calm certainty settled inside me. I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply stepped out of the shadows where she preferred I remain. And sometimes, the smallest movement toward your own dignity is enough to make another person's whole illusion crumble. The days ahead would not be simple, but they would, for the first time in a long while, be mine. Daniel came by more often after that night, not because he needed answers, but because he needed a place where he didn't feel like the ground was shifting under his feet. I made extra coffee in the mornings, left the porch light on in the evenings, and kept my phone nearby in case he called. A mother doesn't stop tending just because her child becomes a man. She simply tends in quieter ways. Meanwhile, news about Claire traveled in careful, brief messages. Her suspension at work had shifted into a formal review once the audit team confirmed that several reimbursement documents were altered. Officer Halstead had interviewed her too. Daniel told me this with a haunted look, as if the idea of his wife sitting across from an authority figure shocked him more than the mistakes she'd made. I didn't revel in any of it. If anything, it made my heart feel heavier. People often think consequences are storms that arrive suddenly, but most of the time, they begin as tiny cracks no one bothers to mend. One quiet afternoon, as I watered the plants on my windowsill, Daniel arrived unannounced. He looked thinner, the kind of tired that sleep can't fix. I handed him a glass of iced tea, and he stood by the counter, staring at the condensation running down the side. "Mom," he said softly. "Claire moved back to her sister's for a while." I paused, then nodded. "That might give you both space to think." He took a shaky breath. She says she's being attacked, that everything's a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. His voice cracked. But Mom, when I asked her to explain the receipts, she told me I should just trust her. She said you were trying to turn me against her. I leaned my elbows on the counter, watching him the way I used to when he came home overwhelmed from school. And what do you believe? I asked. I believe the documents, he whispered. And I believe you. There was relief there, but also sorrow. Trust shouldn't have to be proven on paper, but sometimes it must be. He spent the rest of the afternoon in the backyard, sitting under the oak tree Harold planted the year Daniel was born. I watched him from the kitchen window, his figure still, his shoulders heavy. It struck me how adulthood can feel like walking through a dark room holding memories as lanterns, hoping the glow reaches far enough to keep you steady. Later that evening, after Daniel left, I received an unexpected email. It was from an attorney named Margaret Hale, representing the medical office where Claire worked. She explained, formally, politely, that due to the ongoing investigation, they needed my full cooperation to authenticate several documents. Attached were copies of Claire's altered receipts. Seeing my name written on falsified paperwork, dates changed, totals inflated, signatures forged. It did something strange to me. Not anger, not even sadness, just a deep quiet, like the closing of a long, difficult chapter. I replied with everything they needed, attaching my original versions. Before sending the email, I read through it twice, making sure every word remained factual, calm, and without trace of bitterness. That was important to me. Truth should stand clean on its own. A few days passed. I filled the time with small, grounding activities, repotting my lavender, reorganizing my pantry, writing in my journal. I reminded myself that life has a rhythm beyond conflict, a pulse beneath worry. And even as everything around me shifted, the world remained steady in its small, beautiful ways. One morning, I visited the local grocery store. As I reached for a carton of eggs, I heard someone say my name. Mrs. Turner? Turning, I saw Officer Halstead walking toward me, his uniform neat, his expression kind. I didn't mean to startle you, he said. I just wanted to let you know the investigation is nearing completion. Your documentation was extremely helpful. I'm glad I could provide clarity, I replied. He nodded, glancing around as if to ensure our conversation wouldn't embarrass me. Then he lowered his voice. These things happen more often than people think. Financial misrepresentation, especially around weddings. It can spiral quickly. I imagine so, I said. He studied me for a moment. You handled this with a kind of grace most people don't manage. I just wanted to acknowledge that. His words settled over me gently, like a shawl placed around my shoulders. Thank you, I said. I only did what seemed right. After he left, I stood by the dairy section for a long moment, feeling the oddest blend of gratitude and exhaustion. Life does not always give you applause for doing the right thing, but sometimes it hands you a quiet nod from a stranger who understands the weight you carried. When I got home, Daniel was already sitting on my porch steps. He had a folder with him, a thin one, unlike mine. Mom, he said, standing as I approached. I filed for a temporary separation. I inhaled softly, not surprised, not startled, just aware that another shift had arrived. I'm sorry, I said, touching his arm. He shook his head. No, I think it's the only way forward. She still insists everything is my fault. She won't apologize. She keeps saying you manipulated the situation. I sighed quietly. People who can't face their own actions sometimes blame the nearest steady thing. He looked away, blinking hard. I feel stupid. You're not stupid, I said firmly. You loved someone who wasn't ready to love you honestly. That's not stupidity. That's humanity. He sat beside me on the porch swing. I could feel the tremor in him, not fear exactly, but the shivering vulnerability of a man whose life has taken a bend he didn't anticipate. "I keep wondering," he said, "if I missed the signs, if I ignored things because I wanted everything to be perfect." "We all do that," I whispered, "especially when we want something to work." He nodded, tears gathering but not falling. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft creak of the swing, the rustle of leaves overhead, the distant rumble of a lawnmower. "Mom," he said finally, "how did you stay so calm through all this?" I smiled faintly. "Age gives you perspective. After losing Harold, after rebuilding my life alone, you learn what deserves your storm and what only deserves your stillness." He rested his head against the back of the swing. "I don't know what comes next." "You don't need to," I said. "Not yet. Just take one gentle step forward. That's enough." Over the next week, things continued to unfold. Claire sent Daniel long, frantic messages, swinging between anger and desperation. Her sister called him once, accusing him of being influenced by that old woman. When Daniel told me, I didn't react. Some words only bruise if you let them in. Workplace HR completed their review, and according to what Daniel shared, Claire lost her position. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just the inevitable result of a system built to protect itself. One evening, Daniel and I sat outside again, the air cool, the cicadas humming their persistent summer song. He held a mug of tea, turning it slowly in his hands. "Mom," he said, "I know this has been overwhelming, but somehow I feel lighter, as if seeing the truth, even with all the pain, is better than living confused." I nodded. Clarity is a kind of freedom, sometimes a painful one, but freedom nonetheless. He looked at me then, his expression softened in a way I hadn't seen since before the wedding. "I want to rebuild my life, carefully, honestly, and I want you to be part of that rebuilding." Emotion rose in me, deep, warm, quiet. "I'm here," I said. "I've always been here." That night, after he left, I stood at my window again, watching the moon cast a pale glow across the lawn. The world felt calmer now, not because everything was resolved, but because the truth had found air to breathe. I realized something as I watched the branches sway. I had never sought retribution. I had sought recognition. And somewhere along the way, I had found it, not through anger, but through documentation, steadiness, and the simple refusal to let myself be erased. The story wasn't finished yet, but for the first time in a long while, I felt the ground beneath me become solid again. And that, at my age, is its own kind of miracle. The real change didn't arrive with a phone call or a letter. It slipped into my life the way morning light creeps across a kitchen floor, soft, patient, almost shy at first. A few months passed. The investigation wrapped up. The medical office formally ended Claire's employment after confirming the altered invoices. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, no shouting in hallways, just signed documents, HR notes, and a quiet entry in some internal system marking her departure. She wasn't arrested. From what Officer Halstead told Daniel, the company chose internal consequences over formal charges as long as restitution was arranged. It was all very official, boring almost. Contracts, HR policies, repayment plans. No fireworks. But that was the point. My revenge, if you can call it that, was never going to be fire and brimstone. It was going to be printouts and signatures and the simple refusal to let lies stand. Claire and Daniel's separation papers came next. I didn't read them. I just saw the manila envelope resting on my son's lap one evening as he sat on my couch, staring at nothing in particular. He had dark circles under his eyes, but there was a steadiness in his voice I hadn't heard before. "She wants to move to another city." he said quietly. Start over. She said this town is tainted for her now. I folded my hands. Sometimes people think distance will fix what truth already uncovered. He nodded, eyes distant. We signed the temporary separation. I don't know if it'll become permanent, but it feels like it already is. We sat in silence, the only sound the slow ticking of the clock above the TV. I thought about the woman who had once told me I'd embarrass her at her own wedding, who had built a story where I was the problem she needed to control. Now, the only thing controlling anything was the paper trail she'd tried to bend. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Free from walking on eggshells at family gatherings. Free from decoding half-truths in text messages. Free from wondering if my kindness was being quietly embezzled, just like those invoices. One morning, as the leaves began to turn, I decided to do something small, and entirely for myself. I went down to the community center and signed up for a basic computer class. The young woman at the desk, a college student with chipped blue nail polish, smiled brightly when I wrote my name on the form. These classes go over online banking, email safety, that kind of thing, she said. We'll even show you how to organize your digital receipts. Digital receipts, I repeated, amused. I've got 3 binders full of the paper kind. She laughed. You'll fit right in. The first day of class, I walked into a room full of people with gray hair and careful movements, each of us sitting in front of a sleek monitor, like it was a small, polite animal we were hoping not to startle. The instructor, a man barely older than Daniel, spoke slowly and kindly, showing us how to export statements, download PDFs, and save them into folders with names we would actually remember. As I clicked and scrolled, I realized something. My habit of documentation, the very thing Claire had underestimated, was not just some old-fashioned quirk. It was a skill, a form of quiet power. And now, I was learning to carry it into a digital world. After class, a woman named Ruth invited me for coffee. She wore bright scarves and carried a battered planner with sticky notes spilling out of it. We sat at a small table by the window, clutching our paper cups like teenagers skipping responsibilities. I signed up for this class because my grandson said I'd get scammed if I didn't learn, she said with a laugh. He's probably right, I smiled. My son says the same. Turns out paper trails are useful in every century. We traded stories. She talked about a neighbor who had pressured her into co-signing a loan she thankfully refused. I told her, in gentle strokes, about a wedding, some receipts, and a young woman who thought an old one wouldn't notice numbers changing. Ruth looked at me with those sharp, kind eyes older women often have. You didn't let it slide, she said. Good. Too many of us do. Her words stayed with me that night as I sat at my dining table with my new laptop open beside my old binder. For the first time, I scanned a receipt on my little printer and watched it appear on the screen. It felt like magic, but also like continuity. My old habits learning a new language. Have you ever realized, much later than you wish you had, that the very thing people mocked you for was the thing that would save you? One weekend, Daniel helped me set up a budgeting app that linked to my bank account. We sat together on the couch, his laptop open on the coffee table, my reading glasses sliding down my nose. You've been so careful all these years, he said, scrolling through the categories. You could probably teach half my friends how to manage their money. I chuckled. They wouldn't listen. Wisdom is like leftovers, appreciated only when you finally get hungry enough. He smiled, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to tug on my sleeve in the grocery store, asking if we could afford the cereal with the cartoon on the box. Mom, he said, voice softening. Thank you for everything, for not letting them rewrite what you actually did, for showing me it's okay to walk away from something that looks perfect from the outside, but feels wrong on the inside. A warmth spread through my chest, gentle and deep. "You're welcome, sweetheart." He started going to counseling not long after that, first on his own, then with a small support group his therapist recommended. He'd tell me pieces of what he learned: how to recognize manipulation, how to set boundaries, how to forgive himself for not seeing sooner. I listened, offered tea, and stayed out of the way of his healing. It was his path now, not mine, but I was grateful to see him walking it. As for me, my life grew quietly fuller. I joined a book club at the library where I used to shelve returns. I started walking with 2 neighbors every morning, our sneakers scuffing the same cracked sidewalks as we swapped stories about children, pensions, and the absurdity of streaming subscriptions. I installed a little camera by my front door, not out of fear, but out of the calm understanding that it's all right to see clearly who comes into your space. Bills still arrived. I still opened them at the table with my glasses low and my pen nearby. But now, there was no sting of being taken for granted attached to each payment. My money served me, and the people I chose to help, with open eyes on all sides. One late afternoon, as the sky blushed pink and gold, I sat on my porch with a mug of chamomile tea. The air was soft, the kind that makes you feel younger than you are. Daniel pulled into the driveway and joined me, settling into the chair beside mine. "HR finalized everything," he said. "Claire's agreed to repay what she took, slowly, over time. They've documented it all." I nodded. "That's good. I thought I'd feel more, I don't know, angry, satisfied, something loud." He shook his head. "But I just feel relieved." "That's what real closure feels like," I said. "Quiet." We watched a car pass, then another. A child on a bike wobbled at the corner and then found his balance. "Do you think," he asked after a while, "that I'll trust again?" I turned to look at him, this man who had once fit in the crook of my arm. "Yes," I said, "because you're already doing something most people never manage. You're learning from what hurt you instead of letting it harden you." He nodded slowly. "I hope so." I looked out at the fading light, feeling the peace of a long, complicated story finally settling into its place. Did you ever notice that the deepest revenge isn't about making someone else suffer, but about refusing to keep suffering in the same old way yourself? Claire moved away eventually. I heard through brief messages that she took some financial responsibility classes as part of her agreement with her former employer. A small part of me hopes she truly learns from it, that she one day looks back and realizes all the shortcuts she took weren't worth the dignity she lost. Not because I need anything from her, but because the world is hard enough without people repeating their worst mistakes. My life now isn't glamorous. It's not the kind of story that ends with dramatic speeches in courtrooms or $1,000,000 settlements. It ends with me, an older woman, sitting on a porch with a worn mug and a steady heart, with a son who hugs me tightly before he leaves, with a folder of receipts that once proved I wasn't invisible, and a laptop that reminds me I never have to be again. In the end, my retribution was simple. I told the truth, I gathered my evidence, I stood my ground, and I chose a life where my worth is no longer up for negotiation. And the sweetest part of all is not that she fell. It's that I finally stood up. Thank you for staying with me through my story. If it touched you, I'd be grateful if you liked this video, subscribed so we can share more quiet truths together, and maybe left a comment with your own thoughts. And if you were in my place, what would you have done?